I'm with Congressman Dan Crenshaw from Texas. Congressman Crenshaw and I serve on the Budget Committee. And Dan, let me just ask you, you're a little bit younger than I am. How do you see the debt that we are passing on to your generation, which is over $80,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country? What's your take?
Well, we don't appreciate it that much, so thanks for that, but I appreciate the hard work. I'm going to try and do something about it. The reality is that that is a burden that my generation does have to bear, and that frustrates me more than anything. But I think what's more immoral about it is the continuous promising of more and more and more, right? So there's this tendency, especially on the left, to keep promising things in order to get reelected. I find that to be really problematic. It's almost like you're buying people off in order to earn their support. We'll just give you more, whether it's free, and it's obviously gotten out of control. Free healthcare, free tuition, free jobs for everybody. More Social Security. Let's expand Medicare. I mean, who's going to pay for these things? And by some estimates, just Medicare alone, you'd have to double taxation on people. And then they promise that somebody else will pay for it. Now the math doesn't work out, of course, and that's the second big lie of this entire thing, is actually who's going to pay for it. I think by some calculations, if you just did the 70% tax rate on the 10 millionth dollar, which was AOC's haphazardly proposed plan, that would raise maybe $700 billion over 10 years. That doesn't even come close to paying for even a fraction of the programs that they're promising people, and that truth has to get out there. What Democrats will say instead is that it's tax cuts that cause the debt, and I think we both know that's not true. Math doesn't add up there either. So it's problematic for my generation. We have to make the hard decisions and rein in these mandatory spending programs that are really driving us into oblivion.
Well, you were in on the Budget Committee as I was, and to not pass a budget, to basically just raise the caps, not designate anything, and when the Democrats made the comment that a draconian cut in anything of 10% would wreck the economy. Mm-hmm. How do we get to not platitudes of just saying we're going to do it?
When you vote to raise spending caps, but you don't even know what you're going to be spending that money on, because there's this philosophy on the left that the more money you spend, the bigger your heart is, and they equate those two things. That's a connection in their mind. Like, if you want to spend less money, it's because you have less empathy for people. I mean, that's the argument they used, and it's a real cheap shot. It's intellectual laziness on a pretty high level, but worse than that, it's a way for them to question our morals just because we think we should spend less. And I would argue it's immoral to keep spending more and keep promising people more things that you can't possibly pay for. And you will ask them for that money eventually. And that's the message we've got to give to the middle class, especially because, there's, again, this lie that is told on the left is that the rich will pay for it. Okay, well, and the rich don't pay for their fair share. Well, depending on, you can use all sorts of calculations. I think the top 10% of earners pay about 75% of all federal revenue. So I don't know if that's fair or not, but it doesn't sound fair. Fair would seem to be a different number. But putting that aside, they don't have enough money to pay for all the programs that they want. They don't have enough money to pay for what we're spending now. So you do have to tax the middle class eventually if you're going to pay for all these big, lofty promises that they make. And what you have to do is look at, say, European countries that have these giant welfare states that do like to raise their taxes really high and spend on big welfare systems. Okay, if that's the choice, then at least offer that. Be honest and say, I want to raise your taxes here, and I want to give you this. But they don't do that. They say, I'm going to give you all this, but I'm going to raise somebody else's taxes. So it's class warfare, and it's extremely dishonest. And it's just another form of identity politics that they play, where they're trying to pit different groups against each other. And this is the real sadistic thing that they're doing. They're promising one group power over another group, and sometimes that's based on gender, sometimes that's based on race, sometimes it's based on class. But it's dishonest. It's a dishonest way to govern.
It's dishonest and it's unfair.
Yeah.
To saddle your generation and those before it and really after it to some extent with having to pay for this, because we're going to end up like France. Mm-hmm. And to hear Bernie Sanders say, we've got the $32 trillion for Medicare. To hear Bernie Sanders say we've got the $93 trillion for
Green New Deal.
Ocasio's plan.
Yeah.
And then to say we can't afford the mass immigration and what it's going to do to the country. But it's a dilemma on what we physically can do other than be a sounding board and point out the atrocity. And they have seized that they use the moral argument, just like you say. And we've got to find a way to do something to reverse that. And we've got the winning argument. It's just couching it to counteract what they're doing.
Well, it's not moral to buy me off with lies. And that's what my generation has to wake up to. Don't try and buy me off with your big government lies, because that's what it is. In the end, if you create a society full of dependent people, you'll have a failing society. It'll take some years, especially with all the success we have as a country. It'll take some few decades to decline, but it will. It'll naturally decline. When you stop depending on yourself and when you believe that somebody owes you something, that is the sign of a decaying society. And I think that's the argument we use. We always have to bring it back to sort of cultural foundations and of personal responsibility and love of country and love of liberty and liberty within a rule of law. If we bring it back to those principles, I think we help the younger generation understand the policies that we're trying to place on them. Another way to look at it, I like to couch it in this way. It's like, listen, Republicans are your parents, right? And they don't always tell you what you want to hear, but they're trying to raise you right. Democrats are your really rich aunt who just spoils you. It gives you whatever you want, right? But there's no consequences in that world, And I think we all know that even though, yes, you don't like your strict, boring parents, but that's what good governance unfortunately looks like, and that's what you have to live within in order to be successful.
Our job is to come up with solutions and try to get it past a Congress where we don't have the majority in the House. Thank God for Senate. Thank God for Donald Trump.
I think the president probably needs to. He can rest on a pretty successful presidency so far. All right, trying to keep the country safe, keeping our economy on track. Those are good things to run on. I think a lot of people in the suburbs, they want stability. They want to know their communities are going to be safe, and they want to know that their jobs are going to be somewhat secure because the economy isn't going to hell. Well, I think we've accomplished that in a pretty big way. You point to the radical policies of Democrats, and you can point to a very different world, and one that disrupts their world quite a bit. I mean, they want to get rid of your health care. They want to get rid of your private insurance plans. A lot of these people have employer health insurance plans, and the Democrats are pretty open about the fact that they want to get rid of those. They're also pretty open about the fact that they want open borders. Nobody wants open borders. Now, a lot of Democrat voters, I think, are still believing that their politicians that they vote for are not open border people. And they'll say this very, off the cuff. They'll say, "Listen, no, they're not. Nobody's for open borders. We just don't think your solutions are good." Well, what's Democrats' solution then? They don't have one, and they fight against every possible solution we offer, whether it's amnesty or asylum reform or walls or even technology or even giving more resources to border agents. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent here, but it's a good example of I think what people are looking for: safety, security, and prosperity. And I think that should be our message, but it also has to be in a certain tone. I think we need to get away from certain talking points. We have to get away from that kind of real vitriolic attack style and just dismissing the other side. We have to come up with solutions on healthcare. I think the president was right on that, and I think we have to come up with solutions to environmental concerns. I think we need an answer to the Green New Deal. We can't just ridicule it. And that answer is going to be couched in better technology, carbon capture, natural gas exports, things that are actually cleaner, and nuclear, for instance, things that are cleaner but also viable, not nonsense pie-in-the-sky thinking like the Green New Deal is. We can capture that middle back, I think. So it's not so much about changing policies, because our policies are the right ones, and they're based in conservative principles. The left has no basis. Right? Progressivism by nature is not a base of anything. It's just progress. Well, who's to say what progress is good and bad? Well, they do. Based on what? Whatever they feel like. That's the thing. It's not based on any founding principle. That's a real problem. Like, that's a real dangerous place to go, because it's just based on social whims. And that's why it's not a coherent governing strategy and never will be. It's good for activists. And sometimes they're right. Like, sometimes they'll point something out and they'll say, okay, that is a problem. That's a problem I didn't notice. Okay, but your solution is crazy. Okay, then that's the thing. So like paid family leave is a good example of that. Like, I've actually started to support the paid family leave program proposed by Marco Rubio and Mike Lee and others. So it's the basic idea is that you borrow from your own Social Security. It doesn't change the overall trajectory of Social Security. It doesn't change the long-term debt. It allows you to borrow from yourself. That's a good conservative solution, in my opinion, to the paid family leave issue. Not creating a government bureaucracy, not creating a new program, it's not disrupting the market, it's not putting a burden on small businesses, it's just allowing you to use money you will already have, but you can use it earlier. Basically, you're allowing yourself to borrow from someone who is richer than you, which is you, many, many years from now, because the best indicator of wealth is how old you are. So I don't want to tax younger people to pay for big programs. I want to give younger people the option to save for themselves, have more responsibility for themselves, and then, and if we're talking about how to control the debt later on, means test those programs later on. That's a better way to do things.
And sunset some of the programs.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got a perfect opportunity, like you mentioned the Green New Deal. Congressman Cortez, when they asked her how she's going to pay for it, her literal response was, we just are.
Mm-hmm.
You and I couldn't go to a bank and borrow on a car and just say, hey, when they ask how we're going to pay it back, well, we just are. So we've got to come up with plans, just like we do with the budget.
Right.
Spending, we can't just criticize it. We've got to say, this is where we are, this is how we're going to get out of it. And it's spending cuts at all levels, and it's a challenge, and we've got to have the right message and the tone too. John Kerry, when he was discussing climate change, didn't have one solution on how to pay for it. He was spouting off all these numbers, how I guess he believes we're ending life as we know it in 10 years or 12 years, but he didn't have any solutions on how to pay for
it. They just want to fear-monger. We had a hearing yesterday in Homeland Security on the disaster preparedness subcommittee, and as you can imagine, it was about how to prepare for disasters. But was that what the hearing was about? No, of course not. All they wanted to talk about was climate change. That's fine, talk about it, but this isn't the jurisdiction for it. Like our subcommittee doesn't have jurisdiction over that. This is disaster preparedness. So whether climate change is man-made or not, it really doesn't matter. We've been having disasters for a very, very long time. I showed them 11 pages of the history of Houston since 1836. All the disasters we've had. Turns out flooding is not a new thing when you're living in a flat land with clay as ground and you're basically living on a bayou. This stuff is not new, never has been. It doesn't really matter what caused it. Let's just talk about the infrastructure needs to make our cities better. In the 1930s, I've got videos of Houston under 7 feet of water. And that was without any development, okay? That was without any global warming. This stuff happens no matter what. And let's just prepare for it, but they don't want to have that conversation, unfortunately. They just want to fear-monger. And I'm not so sure what the underlying motivation of that is, because if it's not preparing for these disasters, then it must be something else. And you got to wonder what that is. And then the Green New Deal comes out, and you're like, well, that was sort of a Freudian slip. It's actually what they're really thinking, and it is because the Green New Deal is a socialist takeover of the economy. It has nothing to do with climate change. If it did, it wouldn't be eliminating nuclear. Okay, that's the most reliable carbon-free energy there is. If you cared about climate change, you wouldn't be doing that. So it's really not about climate change for them. It is truly about controlling your life, and the Green New Deal is sort of, I think, in a way, an accident that they didn't mean to come out, but it is really how they think about these things.
And they don't have anything else. They jump from one thing to another because they're out of issues. Their solutions don't work. Well, I just want to, it's a pleasure to serve with you. We both agree that the answers to our problems are not adding 1,000 pages to the Federal Registry. It's not raising taxes. It's a combination of cuts, sound programs, and conservatism, which you represent, I represent. And I just appreciate you coming in today and a great discussion.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it.